Hi, I'm Len Rydell, Executive Director of the Blue and Gray Education Society, and I'd like to welcome you to our May 1996 symposium and tour of Gettysburg, the third day. You have perhaps already heard Frank O'Reilly's opening lecture on the decision to stay and fight. Now I'd like to focus more on the Confederate decision and the controversy within the Confederate leadership. Jeffry Wert had just completed a biography, a very fine biography on James Longstreet, Lee's controversial general. And in many people's minds, Longstreet certainly takes a large portion of the blame for Lee's loss. Of course, at another time, I'll perhaps talk about the lost cause a bit, but Longstreet primarily gets in trouble after the war, several years after, and just before Lee passes away in 1870. And Longstreet's made the mistake of making peace with the Federals and taking an appointment from his old friend Ulysses S. Grant, who is now the President of the United States. And worse than that, he's accepted an offer to write You Were There kind of an analysis of the Civil War in Gettysburg. And so he's written several articles that have been published that have caused a great deal of controversy on the, quote, mistakes of Gettysburg, unquote. And in this, he blames Lee, and he points out that there is a controversy between Lee and him as to what the appropriate strategy would be in the tactics for operating here. Longstreet doesn't want to, clearly doesn't want to fight at Gettysburg. He wants to do something else. And so I asked Jeff to go and lay that out and lay out the background of this. It is a fascinating subject. There are, between Longstreet and Richard Ewell, who doesn't advance and take Culp's Hill at the end of the first day, to Jeb Stuart being absent. The people who are strong defenders of Robert E. Lee all point to these failures of these subordinate commanders, Longstreet, Stuart, Ewell, as a reason. They even point to A.P. Hill, who stumbles into the fighting at Gettysburg by sending a reconnaissance and force on the first day to find out who's there, and ends up fighting a battle. And so Lee is basically portrayed as a man who has been betrayed by the buffoons around him, some incompetent, some careless, and some recalcitrant. And so part of this great myth that surrounds Robert E. Lee and his greatness as a commander and as a leader is shored up by the lost cause people who blame subordinates for Lee's failures on the battlefield. So I think you're going to find this a real fascination. If you haven't heard the story before, certainly you won't have anybody any better to present it to you than Jeffry Wert. Jeff at the time was a high school teacher, but wrote so well and is such a quality historian. He lives in Center Hall, Pennsylvania, and his wife, Gloria's delightful lady. Jeff became very popular, and like Brian Wills, wrote so well that he achieved New York City publishing house fame. And so his books got wider circulation than others did, the so-called professional historians. And consequently, Jeff became very popular on the speaking circuit back again 25 years ago. Jeff is long since retired, and I don't think he's nearly as active as he used to be as a speaker. And if he does speak, I think it's primarily up in the Pennsylvania area. So this is a real treat to hear a guy who is at his prime of his historical curiosity, and the quality of his work is obvious in the presentation he makes to you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Jeffry Wert on Longstreet and the controversy about Gettysburg.
showed that he was not very good at it. In fact, he did real well. He chose not to attack Suffolk. He needed help from the Navy, but nevertheless, it's this framework with Longstreet. If his troops had not been able to gather the supplies, there's an argument, pretty solid argument, that Lee would not have been able to assume the offensive in June of '63. Also, he's been vilified for being not at Chancellorsville. Well, Lee didn't expect him to be at Chancellorsville, so I'll go with Lee on that, because Longstreet could not gather supplies and stay near a railhead. He could not do both, and that's why he got there. Lee fought Chancellorsville without the expectation Longstreet would join him. Longstreet joined the Army, came back to the Army on May 9th. En route through Richmond, he had met with the Secretary of War and proposed perhaps detaching troops to the Western Theater. He suggested 2 divisions could be sent. Now, did he want to go with those 2 divisions? Well, he's not altogether clear at this time. He had earlier in the year proposed such a coordination of units. Once he gets back to the Fredericksburg area, he and Lee will sit down, and from May 10th, the day Jackson died, until May 13th, these 2 men will be closeted together. Now, for Longstreet, in history's blank, looking back at Longstreet, he will choose to write about that. The problem is, he doesn't write about it very well, and he's not very truthful about what his views were. But when the May 13 meeting ended between these 2 men, Lee had decided to go to Richmond, and he will go the next day, to propose an offensive north, hopefully into Pennsylvania. On that same day, and this is much more, because Longstreet will say afterwards that he opposed this idea and so forth. That's not true. I think when he wrote some of these things, he was a man who continued to try to almost remove himself from Gettysburg. If you are blamed as the prime agent of the defeat of the battle that had already become the battle, the great if of Confederate history, you might understandably want to remove yourself. But what is interesting, though, is his views in May 13th. He wrote to Lord T. Wigfall, Senator Lord T. Wigfall in Richmond, a member of the anti-Davis clique, and so forth. But I just took a couple quotes from it. I think it'll give you an idea of what he said. First of all, Longstreet writes, "There's a fair prospect of forward movement. That being the case, we can spare nothing from this army to reinforce in the West," contrary to what he will subsequently write. Contrary to what he proposed, but he had been persuaded, obviously by Lee, that this is something we should do. Again, and I would think that these are Lee's words. Wouldn't you love to know that they were? Because Lee would write differently about it, but this is what he says here. "Grant seems to be a fighting man and seems to be determined to fight. Pemberton seems not to be a fighting man. So in other words, it would be a waste of our troops to send them to the West." And then he adds, finally, "In fact, we should make a grand effort against the Yankees this summer. Every available man and means should be brought to bear against them." So what you have is a general, the senior corps commander in the Army, and he still would have been that had Jackson been alive. He proposed and went along with and agreed to, and he supported, he really did, the idea of a strategic offensive. Now, if you look, you see my outline, it says Second Manassas. And the importance of that must be understood with James Longstreet. He would come to regard that. And I think enough at the time, shortly afterwards, when there was some perspective on what happened at Second Manassas, he would always consider Second Manassas as Lee's masterpiece, because he used the strategic offensive to choose a battlefield and to dictate the terms. And then once that was settled, they fought on the tactical defensive. And he would reiterate this in his writings and so forth, and people, I think, in time would tend to overlook that. He wasn't stubborn at Second Manassas. Freeman, in one of his great quotes, would say that the sieges in Gettysburg were laid on August the 29th and Second Manassas. That's not true. But anyhow, the way that battle developed is the way James Longstreet believed that the battle should develop. And so, as the Army of Northern Virginia prepares to go north, James Longstreet, contrary to post-war writings, endorsed the idea that Lee had proposed and outlined to him and they had talked about. Now there's another thing I think that Longstreet should be given credit for. He would write this afterwards, but he would express this similarly at the time too. But he said that the greatest problem that faced the Confederacy in the May of '63 is manpower. And if you look at the general histories of the war since, that's the one thing where it said manpower shortages started to cripple the Confederacy in the spring of '63. Longstreet was writing this soon after the war, the same thing. He said that the mistake of the Confederacy during the war was, and I quote, in pitting force against force, unquote. He said in the spring of '63 the time had now arrived, surely, that the skill of generals, strategy, and tactics should replace, as he said, muscle against muscle. And interestingly, he also will say, and I quote, our purpose should have been to impair the morale of the Federal Army and to shake Northern confidence in the Federal leaders. Now again, that's post-war and so forth, but I will tell you, he will be making that now. Some say it was a harebrained argument in the winter of '64 to put infantry and mules and send them into Kentucky. Probably was rather harebrained. I mean, to find enough mules, and well, I don't know what they would have done in mules anyway, but that was part of the scheme, you know. But he wanted to go into Kentucky because he is writing, as Lee's writing, in the same time frame, and this goes back to it, that what we have to do is defeat Lincoln at the polls. If we're going to win this war, we're going to sustain the Confederate effort, Lincoln has to be defeated. So I just wanted to tell you that there's a consistency to his argument. This man who's, because he graduated 54 in a class of 56, is not called very bright in some writings. I want to tell you, from 25, 27 years of teaching, intelligence and class standing are not the same thing. In no way. And I don't know, I don't say he's one of the great gifts, don't understand it. To say that because he was that low in the class, the man did not have intelligence. That might be, but the idea, of course, and what he's looking at and what he addresses are elements today that Civil War historians say that's what the Confederacy should have been doing. Now, one of the great arguments, of course, that arose subsequently from these meetings and so forth was the fact that Longstreet would say that Lee promised that once they met the Federal Army on northern soil that they would fight a defensive battle. That's not true. Again, he overstates it. However, if you even read the writings of Lee's staff officers and other generals, the consensus in the Army of Northern Virginia's high command level, that consensus was, when we met Hooker's army at that time, of course, we hope to maneuver them so that they will bring the battle to us. So his mistake was saying that Lee promised that. And of course, if you choose to argue about someone and he says these words and he's wrong, you can point that out and he's not wrong there. So they would go north. Interestingly, in every opportunity Lee had in the campaign of their marching north, he took to meet with Longstreet. I think he's the only one left. Lee felt comfortable with and wanted to know his advice in matters and so forth. Longstreet would keep a close control. It was his troops that would back up Stuart and Alley, Middleburg, and Upperville, fighting and so forth. He spent one day all day near Ashby's Gap, and I would imagine everybody in here has experienced that, but if you haven't, it's one of the great joys of nature to go up that Blue Ridge Mountain and crest Ashby's Gap and to look upon one of the most beautiful places I would think anywhere in the world. It's just, but anyway, that's an aside, but I love that part of Virginia. Anyhow, he was up there all day, he comes back, and one of his staff officers said, "General, aren't you tired?" He said, "I never proceed." One thing you must realize about Longstreet, he was a physical man, about 4 inches. Okay, which made him less imposing, right? He really did. Now, of course, Freeman of Longstreet of R.E. Lee and Longstreet of Lee's lieutenant, Freeman is moving that way. And I'm not, Lee's lieutenants are my favorite history book. So I just want to, I'm not, of course, if you're going to choose to write about the Army of Northern Virginia, we will, I would imagine, until the end of time, anybody who's foolish enough to do that will write in the shadow of Douglas Southall Freeman. It's a shadow that will never go away. But anyhow, he shrinks him. But he's a very physical man. He liked the Army. In his life, and he enjoyed that. He liked to be out in the campaign. He's that kind of a man. But anyways, you know, they spent some time in Chambersburg together. And then in the morning of July 1st, as Lee and Longstreet are riding together on the Chambersburg pike coming east, Lee will hear the artillery crack. And he will leave Longstreet behind to make sure that the troops are coming up, and he will spur ahead to find himself caught in this battle. And as Freeman said, he came to Gettysburg like a blinded giant. And I think that's a fair assessment of what Lee came to Gettysburg about. Longstreet will arrive sometime about 5 o'clock or so, somewhere in Seminary Ridge, probably near the seminary, somewhere in that area. I know there's been some artist renditions of it. He will locate Lee, and he will spend some time, I would imagine, because Lee was engaged, as he put it, he would spend some time standing across those fields to the greatest position the Army of the Potomac will hold in the war. And then Lee would be available, and he would say something to the effect that, you know, we have where we want him, General. Now all we have to do is march south, turn the flank of the Northern Army, and make them bring the battle to us. Well, that isn't exactly what Lee wanted to hear. And it's been quoted often, but I will quote it again for you to remind you. Lee allegedly said, and he said something to this, I mean, to say exact verbatim, but it almost probably pointing his fist or something. Lee said, if the enemy is there tomorrow, we must attack him. And to that Longstreet replied, if he is there, it will be because he is anxious that we should attack him. A good reason, in my judgment, for not doing so. And that would set the tone. And that would set the relationship that's going to occur here for the next 2 days. Now, what about this flank movement? What Longstreet proposed was a strategic flank movement. Was it a good idea? Should Lee accepted it? The answer to that is probably no. For a number of reasons. One, all Lee knew at the time was that they had whipped 2 federal corps. Where are the other 5? He doesn't have army up. He doesn't have cavalry, at the front. Where exactly is the flank of the federal army? Where exactly are we going to go? And Lee had no choice, and rightly so, to dismiss this idea of Longstreet. So Longstreet, after a while, will return to his camp back in Chambersburg Pike. The indications are pretty clear from staff officers and so forth that he was a troubled man that night. He'd be up early on July 2nd, and he would meet Lee once again on Seminary Ridge somewhere. They would learn that he would learn that Lee had sent out a reconnaissance under Samuel Johnston, of course. By the way, with him was one of Longstreet's staff officers, John Clark. One of the, I think, wonderful trove of possible letters we could ever want to dig up would be whether John Clark sat down and wrote about this after the battle. Samuel Johnston, his letters, some of his letters in the Virginia Historical Society, strikes me as a very decent man, very decent officer. I don't know this, but I don't think he made it to where he said he did. I don't think he was up to the foot of Little Round Top. There were federal troops in the area. They would have made noise. Yes, there was a mist from the ground and so forth. But I don't think he made it that far. He said he did. You know, we don't have any contradiction from Clark. It just seems to me he did not. So the attack plan for July 2nd is predicated on false information. Of course, it won't matter, because Dan Sickles is going to take it in his own hands. But the fact remains that Lee plan for this battle, at least what he's going to do in a second. He comes back, McLaws and Bush come up, he talks to McLaws. McLaws, by the way, he talked to McLaws because McLaws' division led the march that day. So McLaws is leading the march. And Lee took a map out that he had, and he said that they, and also in some accounts it seems that McLaws came up before Johnston. It makes no sense that McLaws, they discussed this before Johnston got back. Because how could Lee even possibly know what to talk about? The thing you must want to point out, and this is critical because it's critical in the sense of what you wonder about going on here is that of high command that day. Lee will propose this, and he showed to McLaws that he should line his division and put perpendicular to the Gettysburg Road, across where you just drove down as you came out of Gettysburg, right? Longstreet's pacing, and he's listening, and he says, no, Jen, I don't want that way, I want it this way. He said parallel, roughly, and Lee said, no, that is not what I want it perpendicular. What if it would have went that way? What if Dan Sickles wouldn't have gotten that itch, or whatever he overcame Dan Sickles on that afternoon of July 2nd? What if, I mean, you know, it's fun to speculate, this is all I'm going to do here. But what exactly would the Confederates have been attacking? Where? And they advanced up from Warfield Ridge and so forth and headed towards those two round knolls in a perpendicular formation towards that. They would have been running, they would have been opening up their flank to Federal fire on the ridge. And you would think that very quickly, and even in more rapid fashion than before, Little Round Top would have been occupied by that time. Lee's attack plan as formulated made no sense. And the other thing is, this is about maybe 8 o'clock in the morning, and the discussions will continue for a while. No one's really going to check that battlefield out, that end of the battlefield for the rest of the day. They're just not. At least we don't know of anybody who really did. Porter Alexander took his artillery there about 9 o'clock. Started that way. But nobody, Longstreet refused to let McLaws do it. And did he solve? That's probably a good word. There's no question about it. And, you know, I've been accused of many things with my Longstreet book. Essentially being drunk or out of my mind when I wrote where he was as a corps commander in the Army. But he deserved criticism here. And he deserved it in the sense that he left his disagreement with Lee and why they were going to fight the battle to override what had been a characteristic of this man. Very careful, Jim. Second Manassas shows that. You know, when he came in that field and his word with his federal troops in the right flank of on those trains, he wanted to find 3 reconnaissance that day to go out there, to know what he is. He's careful, he's deliberate. When Longstreet hits, he likes to hit. He's quite proud of the fact he liked to call the First Corps of the Army rock, you know. And he told me, essentially, at least he claimed he did this, let the rock of the Army Northern Virginia, when we get into Pennsylvania, the great rock of the Army, we'll stand and we'll hold the line against federal attack and let Ewell and Hill's Corps deliver the counterattack. And so this is this man who's careful, who's deliberate, who wanted to plan, who wanted to know. Because he understood that if you don't, and if you attack, you're going to kill more men than it's worth. Only as an aside, he thought that Chancellorsville wasn't Lee's masterpiece. Chancellorsville shouldn't have been fought that way. For one reason. What did it give the South? More dead, percentage of casualties greater than the Army of the Potomac suffered. Of course, Jackson was going from it. He thought that battle made no sense as it was fought, because there wasn't anything that he could achieve by fighting that battle as he looked back on it. But what does he do in the morning of July the 2nd as Lee rides over to talk to Ewell? He doesn't do much of anything that we can tell. When I was working on this, I called Harry Farnsworth and I said, Harry, what did he do? And I haven't found anything, and neither did I, so I felt pretty good. You know, that's a wonderful book. And I think he just essentially stayed in Seminary Ridge. He doesn't send his superb staff. Best staff in the Army. He did. Two of them will make general. Nobody's comparable with that. See, Longstreet didn't mind them exploiting him around it. He's confident, he's self-confident man. He didn't care about that. He's one of those, he picked them and so forth. Doesn't send any of those top staff officers like that. Well, he waits and waits, and I think he thought, well, maybe one more shot. And this is speculation. When Lee comes back, maybe I can change his mind. Well, Lee comes back, and he doesn't change his mind. The question is, was Longstreet ordered to begin the movement to the right, to the attack? Probably not specifically with Lee saying, General, take your 2 divisions and move to the right. Did he know that's what Lee expected? Absolutely. Because it was Longstreet who sent Alexander's artillery to the right and told, you know, he knew it at 9 o'clock when he sent Alexander. He knew what he was expected of him. And he doesn't move. Lee comes back. They have this. Lee gives the order, which as many of you well know. Longstreet's able to convince him to wait for Evander Law's brigade. So sometime between 12 and 1, probably closer to 12:30 or so, this 13,000, 14,000 man snake of infantry will move. Now, Peter the Slow, right? Here we go. Doesn't make it, right? Well, if you don't know, I don't have to talk about, but 1923, I think, 20, they brought in some army troops to do this march. They didn't make it, folks. A lot less of them. They duplicated Longstreet's march, and they could not do it in the same time frame. 1989, 1990, somewhere around there, they brought in an 800-man battalion of United States Marines. They did it. They beat them. 800 man now, not 14,000. They beat them by half hour. And that's even the back and forth. Now see, that's the other problem. If you've not done this, and you want to see it, it's there. Now it's great, fire, nice ranch house. But that rise is there. You go from Black Horse Tavern, you drive across, and you will come up that rise, right past Black Horse Tavern. That is the rise. Where they, oh, there's a little round top, they can see it. That's become so famous that we had to backtrack from. It's there, you can, you know, if you walk it, it's not that far apart your car, you get that sense of walking up to it. If you start rising up, and you get there, you're going to see it, and so forth. Longstreet was probably up there in the hill to the left, came forward, and they would get up there in the hill. Then they will start to backtrack and so forth. So they do ultimately get in position. By that time, Dan Signals had done the Confederate Army a major favor. They'd opened up and exposed Meade's flank and so forth. And as James Longstreet would say subsequently, that his men did the 3 hours of the greatest fighting done by any troops in any battlefield. There's a good argument to be made for that. One of the best lines, I think, of the whole thing came from one of his men, who survived that afternoon attack on July 2nd. He wrote home shortly thereafter, he said, I thought we were fighting all of eternity. Because, as you know, unit after unit of federal troops came in there, and in there, and in there, and they kept fighting. And they came awful close. They came awful close to doing what Lee asked them to do. Subsequently, 4 days after the Battle of Gettysburg, and if you don't like Longstreet, I recommend you get a copy of this and frame it on your wall. I won't tell you where, but I'm sure it's in some office at a National Park Service in Virginia, framed and highlighted. But anyhow, LaFayette McLaws will write home on July 7th. First of all, in his letter, he said that Longstreet should have conducted a reconnaissance ahead of time. He was right, and McLaws had asked for it. But then the line that every anti-Longstreet person likes. And I quote, I consider him a humbug, a man of small capacity, very obstinate, not at all chivalrous, exceedingly conceited, and totally selfish. If I can, it is my intention to get away from his command. Now what? Why do you write? Oh, he was mad. I mean, McLaws was upset. And the reason McLaws was upset is Longstreet interfered with his division on the afternoon of July 2nd. He was with Kershaw when Kershaw's troops went in. He would ride to Barksdale. It is Longstreet who will trigger Barksdale's attack with Wolford following. That's not what Longstreet did. That's not what a corps commander does. It is Longstreet, when word is reached that Wolford's brigade is in Crossman's Wood, he believes that he's gone too far. It is Longstreet that gives the order directly to pull that brigade back, and essentially that's going to start the retrograde where the Confederate fighting in the second on that flank is going to end. Sure, he interfered with the division. And McLaws had every right to be angry about it. I think that's where you get this small capacity, very opposite, exceedingly conceited. However, what occurred earlier, because Lee wanted to get rid of McLaws. He let Longstreet know that in May. He was not happy with Chancellorsville and McLaws. And according to a post-war letter, Longstreet wrote to McLaws, because they're going to Hill Creek. Of course, Longstreet will unjustifiably court-martial McLaws in Tennessee. He explains it, and he said, I was told that I was responsible for the conduct of your division the next time we were in battle. All I offer here is possibly an explanation for this letter, possibly an explanation for what Longstreet did in that field in July 2nd. He slept near somewhere here, probably near Pitcher's Woods or so forth, on the night of July 2nd. For some reason, neither he nor Lee, I guess Longstreet has to bear responsibility, did not order up Pickett's division. Lee had expected Pickett's division to be on the field that morning. And as you well know, when we came here, met Longstreet again, Longstreet, well, General, I'm where we want him again. We can do this flank march. And by then, I think the redness in these necks went right up. So they always say when he got mad, you could tell it was almost like a thermometer. It just rose up. And he didn't want anything to do with it. He had it with it. So they reshaped this whole battle scheme, this attack scheme that's going to go. Of course, as you know, Longstreet's been criticized for the fact that he argued that McLaws and Hood's division shouldn't have, he didn't want them in it. Well, he was right. You couldn't have attacked with them. It would have exposed everything, that flank and so forth. You have to have a reserve. What about life? As he said, never was I so depressed. And I would assume that meant only professionally, having lost 3 children in the span of a week. I would assume that was the greatest depression ever in his life. There's obviously oversight, mistakes, who commanded what, who gave the orders to whom on July 3rd. I know he tried to pass the buck to Porter Alexander. This attack, whether he said that, and probably to the effect, I commanded a company, I commanded a regiment, and no 15 minutes south and then ever away for battle can take that hill. He knew it. We'll be going out there this afternoon. We'll know it. You stand there in all of these men. You stand in all the men who marched from those woods, and you stand in all the men who were lying behind that stone wall and seeing them emerging from the ground. And Wiley talked about it. It's just all that. And lost everything that he believed, it went against him. And subsequently it's an attack of his doom. And when it's over, of course, he will ride out among them, not quite to that. Well, Lee has come to do it, and Lee admitted it was his fault. What are we left with this general here? What are we left with Longstreet and Lee at Gettysburg? I think that maybe, I don't know, you can't measure that. It's like my own argument is just where he's standing in the class indicates his intelligence. But one of the keen intellects in this army was Porter Alexander. Keenest intellect was at the head of the army. But Alexander had one of the keen intellects in this army. There's no question about it. And you find for the Confederacy is maybe the best book written in the military guys are editor of the expanded military memoirs of Alexander. It's a must book for Army North Virginia. It is a must book. But you also got to go look at his letters to the University of North Carolina. And what does he say about Gettysburg? I just want to quote a couple of things that I think are very pertinent to it. He said in the letter, as he looked back as after the war, quote, I think it is a reasonable estimate to say that 60% of our chances for a great victory were lost by our continuing the aggressor. If Lee did continue aggressive, Alexander would add, and he certainly did. He said, Lee's mistake was the wrong place. He said the only, where we should have attacked, and on July 2nd, was, as he said, and I quote, the sharp salient that was at Cemetery Hill. They could have attacked in depth. But see, that was another thing Longstreet opposed to the charge, where there was no depth to that assault. Pound through in the depth, Alexander said, we can bring artillery fire to bear, versus artillery fire. That should have been the target. But Alexander said that shouldn't have been the target. We should have sat on the ridge and said, go on, George Meade, attack. Because you know, I think Lee might have recognized that. In his post-report, he lists the reasons why he did not do it. I would argue that Meade would have been forced to attack the Confederates on Seminary Ridge. Can you imagine what would happen to Halleck and Stanton if the telegram arrived? Our army's been whipping the first day, but we're going to wait in them. And 3 days later, to get the news that Lee is sitting in southern Pennsylvania waiting for Meade and they haven't done anything, you know, so the pressure would have been enormous. You have to give battle. Now he addresses Longstreet, who Alexander always met Longstreet. He disagreed with him politically after the war. He made no bones about that. He said, and I quote, Longstreet's great mistake was not in the war, but in post-war fighting. He did, and he listened to things that he said, and Longstreet was wrong. The idea that Lee had to get enough blood to satisfy, enough had to fall, his judgment was impaired by his willingness to assume the aggressive. But then I think the most pertinent of all the things, and I will be frank about this, when I found it, I said almost like, hallelujah, if you're in the story. I know, but it was, you sit there, you look at these things, and you address these things, and so forth, and there's this letter. And I quote very briefly. It is true that he, Longstreet, obeyed reluctantly at Gettysburg, reluctantly underlined, on the 2nd and on the 3rd. But it must be admitted that his judgment in both matters was sound, and he owed it to Lee to be reluctant. For failure was inevitable. Underline. Do it soon or do it late, either day. So in the opinion of Porter Alexander, what Lee did in these fields was a mistake that caused the defeat of Gettysburg. And what Longstreet recommended, offered, we don't know what would have happened, offered the opportunity for victory. And most importantly, as his senior subordinate commander, did he not owe it to Lee, and did not Lee want to hear it? I don't think you're right. What do you want? Men around McClellan agree he was a Napoleon? Or do you want somebody to offer a countervailing view? And Longstreet did. And then he tried to justify it, and he's been vilified ever since for that vilification. I guess our problem remains, I'm not sure about this altogether, because I think the South has won most of the military history of the war in the sense of the riding stuff. But if Longstreet was right, then Lee was wrong. And if Gettysburg is the great Confederate if, then it is, as I guess, as Shelby Quick said in the TV thing, Gettysburg was the the price the Confederacy paid for Ralph Lee. Thank you. I don't want to interfere with your lunch. I mean,
no, we're fine.
Yeah,
we're fine.
Okay.
Looking at the map and what Sickles did, where would Longstreet have hit if Sickles had not moved forward? Because to me, when Sickles moved forward, he caused a lot of, he slowed Longstreet's attack down big time.
Oh, yes, that's
Where would he have hit if Sickles had stayed?
Well, that's the problem. Where would it be hit? Sickles had stayed there. As I tried to, say that. The other argument is, of course, what Hood did, sending scouts out. The problem was that simple, by the way. You know that, Hood said we can go around the big knoll, big round top. And he argued for that. Longstreet sent like 3 staff officers, and they all come back and said, General Hood had a good idea. And then about the third trip back from one of the staff officers telling him that he had a good idea. Longstreet went and told Hood, you're going to attack. And there's a lot of that. I think Lee was nearby. We're not even certain about that. That would have happened. It could have. But the assumption is that the Federals would do nothing. Would sit there and watch these divisions march around their flank in towards their wagons. And it may be by that time frame, because the attack rolled forward somewhere around 4 o'clock. It probably would have delayed another 2 hours. And what Longstreet expressed, I think, was Lee's impatience, justifiably so, with what Lee construed to be the slow-moving machine here. At 8 o'clock, I wanted this attack to be made, and here it is 8 hours later, we're still not ready, and now Longstreet's going to come and say, I think you got to try another flank. I think Longstreet knew well enough Lee by now, and he didn't. So if Sickles had not moved forward, that's exactly right. Where would the Confederates have attacked? What would they have hit by going up the Gettysburg Road as originally designed? Remember, if you read Longstreet never shot. He's riding back in the column, and the Gauls, and I think Kershaw's brigade's up there. And they clear the woods out up here, and expecting hardly any Yankees, they see fields full of them. Something's wrong, General, and it's passed back through, and Longstreet rides up, and he's shot. Which is not to dismiss criticism. I think somebody should have been out there a long time ago trying to find those things out. So you're right. I don't know what they would have said. That was also the flaw in this attack, predicated upon probably false information. The Confederate High Command. Ewell wanted to see, hear, or speak about no Yankees on his side. Pete wants to attack him. I think that's a good idea, A.P. Hill is that wonderful thing to do in the movies. He's at Cashtown Tavern. I defy you to tell me where A.P. Hill was after he said, General Lee, I think there's trouble up the road. Hill disappears from this battle. So, I don't mean to be really humorous that, but the point is, the whole Confederate High Command has a bad 2 days across the board. Not just Longstreet. And he deserves criticism for his role in certain matters. Absolutely. But Lee, it's an army that, we're talking of blind as giant. I think it's the blind as giant army that's moving to what happens on July 2nd. What makes it close? Well, we know what makes it close. That incomparable infantry. That's what makes it close. Only they ran into some boys that were just Lincoln so eloquently said they were fighting for their own dunghill. And they weren't about to do it. Yes.
The apparent front that settled on the Confederate Army at Gettysburg, could that have anything to do with the fact that, I don't know how many, but many Confederates thought it was morally wrong to invade?
Well, there was a shift. From the Antietam campaign. There's not a lot of evidence that Lee brought one of the biggest armies he ever brought on the battlefield. There's not that. There is some of that, but I think that has shifted from the fall of '62 when there was a lot of that sentiment. I don't think there was so much either. And what they particularly enjoyed was the Pennsylvania countryside and all those chickens and pigs and everything, you know, to be gathered up. So I think that helped to alleviate the moral, you know. I'm a native Pennsylvanian and proud of it. And I love it. I come from, as you can imagine, Pennsylvania German background, but Dorsey Pender's letter, well, one quote to his wife, he said, you know, these Pennsylvania Dutch are decidedly people of barns and not brains. And I can say that. It's one of the great lines that I hope, well, you know, when, well, never mind. Well, that's a different subject. Any other, yes, sir?
Just comment on the timing of the July 3rd attack. Did Longstreet get orders to attack at daylight, or was that rather vague?
It was vague. It was understood that Lee expected some kind of an offensive operation, but again, as it was, you know, the great lie that would be perpetrated by Pendleton and Early and so forth about July 2nd, that it was a sunrise order. July 3rd, it was understood. Now, Longstreet and Lee did not talk that night, as near as we know. And I think deliberately Longstreet did not go to Lee. Again, that's a guess. And, but it was understood that, and Lee had sent that they were planning to renew the offensive on the next day. See, and that's why Pickett's division, Lee was anticipating Pickett's division to be in the field. Exactly, even when Lee rode out that morning, he wasn't sure exactly where or what he was going to hit on the 3rd. I'm sure he had ideas in his mind, but that was not, so there was no direct orders, you're going to go forward at this hour and attack them. But he anticipated that Longstreet would be having the preparations undergoing for that assault, and that included Pickett. And there was, I mean, Lee's frustration must have been, well, it had to be, to ride over there and to find out, you know, here we are again, and nothing's happening. You know, I directed this. I guess maybe that's the right word instead of a specific order. It was expected. And there we are. The division's not here. Here's Oak Chief telling me we ought to go to a flanking movement because there was scouts out all night. I mean, his frustration level must have been tremendous. Because, I don't know, I guess that's why we all go to these things, and that's why it's so much fun to hear and speculate. But I have come to believe, rightly or wrongly, that this is the battle we won. This is the battle to settle. When he came to Pennsylvania, we are going to settle. And I think if he had any mortal sin in this field, it was the belief that his army could do anything. Because our general will say somewhere else that the greatest compliment Robert E. Lee ever paid his army was Gettysburg. So, I hope that answers it. I kind of said tangent. Any other questions? Oh, yes, sir.
Well, don't you think that Robert E. Lee's thinking was greatly influenced by having handily given the Union forces the defeat of Chancellorsville, and that his ego got pumped up, and like you say, I think that's probably the forerunner for this business of feeling like he could do anything.
Oh, I agree with you, and you know, you're struck with some of the writings. I don't know who it is anymore. Some staff officers said that, you know, July 1st is a really clean stop. We thought we could whip anybody. And, you know, and I'm sure reports came in, and Lee, you know, he had that great sense of his army. The morale is high, if you don't get it. I mean, you know, they're getting to the point, and I would understand why. You're right. They're getting a little bit of disdain for Yankees. So, bring them on. We'll whip any Yankee you can find, you know, and it wasn't just him. And it's up through the whole ranks, and for good reasons. I mean, and I said, again, I'll plead ignorance here. Well, I don't know if there's anything comparable in American military history in the annals if you start and you go from June 1, 62 to May 6, 63. What is quite comparable with the record of the Army of Northern Virginia in that time frame. And so we get every expectation. I agree, yeah. Oh, yeah, all the evidence is there. They had proven it, and but they ran into a different army. They ran into a man who, you talk about how history shapes. You know, here's George Lee. I mean, I don't know. I am not a Army of the Potomac, but did any commander of the Army of the Potomac during the war do a better job than what George Lee did in the field? I wouldn't think so. And that's also, again, because we like to shape history that way. We forget what they did. And they had a lot to do with that defeat. I mean, we can pick the first Texas out and we can count with the first Minnesota in the last second. Because valor was a common thing in the field. It didn't wear uniform colors. You know, and don't you, I always thought you had a sense that they knew it. Maybe Lee's men knew it, and I think maybe the Federals knew it. This is going to settle something here. Yeah.
When Longstreet disagreed with Lee about the attack on July 3rd, did he push that so much that there was a chance of insubordination there, or were they too good of compadres working together for that to have happened?
Well, I think that, you know, how Lee managed to work relationships with subordinates. And I think Lee just left it go. I mean, you know, I think the extreme view has been expressed occasionally, but not often. He probably should have, you know, done something about Longstreet's insubordination. I think Longstreet pushed it as far as he could, and you know, and I think vice versa that. I don't categorize. The reason I say that is, and again, it's, you know, here I am, you know, what do I know? Really, and you know, and you're standing back here in this time frame. But if I remember all the hype over the Persian Gulf War and how Fort Cox just got all these guys together. Well, we do military planning differently now. Of course, some of your veterans well know that. You know, where you want that input, you want that. You can't have everybody nodding their head and agreeing. You could be in trouble. But see, Lee only bonded with one man in the war, and that was Stonewall Jackson. At least that's what everybody likes to think. And I remember, you know, why did Lee always ride near Longstreet's headquarters? Well, that's because you had to watch out for him. No, if I was Lee and he was human, I know he didn't drink, and John Fairfax could have corrected that Longstreet staff. But I think, really, if I was Lee, if I had to spend evenings, they would have been with old Pete instead of old Stonewall. You know, I don't know that has anything to do with it, but they had a very close relationship. And, you know, this thing that he's criticized after the war, where Lee said Longstreet was slow, second Manassas, but particularly the Wilderness. He was, in Lee's mind. Lee was, I mean, his arm was collapsing in that way. And he's waiting. And I think Lee believed that. And when he expressed that belief, that Longstreet was slow as Wilderness, to Lee he was. I mean, Lee was about as animated as you're going to get Lee in the battlefield. But what is forgotten is he marched 43 miles in 36 hours. And most interestingly and most importantly, he brings onto the battlefield of the Wilderness two divisions who are not dead calves. Two divisions who will launch one of the great counterattacks of the war. Yeah, by a narrow margin. Alexander said the problem was Lee. Why keep Longstreet in the extreme end of the army when on May 2nd, you told your ranking officers you expect Grant to turn the right flank of the Army in Northern Virginia through the Wilderness area? Why didn't we shift them earlier? So this criticism of Longstreet is right to Lee. I don't think it's historically right, and that's the difference. You know, again, I'm sorry, but they're an extremely close relationship. His boy, Longstreet, was named after Lee during the war. He was born during the war. He was named his son after Lee. Lee really was upset with Longstreet's politics. Not necessarily Republican, but allowing himself to do some other things. He didn't like that. And they will never see each other, you know, afterwards. Yeah.
Not just kind of follow-up question to his. I think you discussed in your book the controversy about did Longstreet want to go west, take command of the Army of Tennessee. Do you think his dissatisfaction with what happened at Gettysburg, did Lee not listen to him, made him kind of think that maybe it was time for him to go somewhere else?
It seems to me, in the book, and I say it seems to me because, yes, I think that in an honorable way, Longstreet was seeking him out. I don't know exactly I don't know what the right verb is to tell you what Gettysburg did to him. But Longstreet, that's my impression, and I think what my argument is what happened in these fields is a disagreement of two men both believing that their course of action was right and was best for the Army. It wasn't because Longstreet wanted to dominate Lee. Goodness gracious, dominate Lee, and that. But yes, I think he did. Now, he was soon cured of that aberration when he graced the headquarters of Braxton Bragg. And that is not to give Longstreet a pass out there. Longstreet becomes the catalyst. And some new things are coming out that he did not eat. That pot was simmering. All he needed was somebody to put the stick in and stir it. And he had the rank, he had the reputation, and he became a catalyst for that effort to unseat Bragg. But yes, I believe that by all this opportunity came. See, I don't put Longstreet in that Western concentration school to the degree that some have. They could be right and I could be wrong. But see, waivers, and I think critically waivers here in May. When Lee proposed this operation, Longstreet thought this is a better idea because we could do it better than them. So that goes against this consistency in the Western concentration. So you have to look for other things. And I think surely that Longstreet probably had a hope maybe that he might replace Bragg. Well, was he ambitious? Yes. More ambitious than Stonewall Jackson? I don't know. But he's not allowed to be. Stonewall is. So, but I will. I think one. Right?
Any more questions?
Any more questions?
One more.
One more question?
Okay.
Thank you.